Today's video is going to be about editing landscape photos, and for starters I like to use a program called Faststone, and this is for viewing my images. And I like to organize all my photos in folders labeled with the year, the month and a day, and then a simple label kind of describing where I was that day. That helps me find my photos when I go looking for them. And so this one's Dinosaur National Monument, or National Park now, I guess. And so I've selected a photo, and it's a DNG, and so I'm going to go ahead and open it up in Photoshop Elements. And the first thing it's going to do is open up the editor for raw photos. It should pop up here in a second. And there we have our Camera Raw photo editor. That's going to come up before we actually get into Photoshop Elements. I'm just going to kind of go through what I do in this Camera Raw because it just kind of comes up automatically, so well, I might as well use it. But I don't use it too much. So first thing, I'll probably hit this default. That resets everything back to 0. And up at the top we have temperature, and generally I'm not going to be messing with the temperature at this point in time, so I'll just double click, put that back where it was. Same thing with tint. I would never do anything with that. Exposure, I might make a little change. We got kind of a lot of contrast between light and dark, so let's go to the highlights here. Turn that down a bit. Shadows, we definitely got some shadows there to lighten up. And the whites, we'll see what that does. It kind of defines the clouds a little more, so I'll go with that. And the blacks, it kind of makes it stand out a little bit. And the rest of these I never use. The clarity, vibrance, at this point in the game, I just leave those where they are. Same thing with sharpening. I never sharpen early on. Sharpening for me is always almost to the last little bit of editing that I do, so I never touch these. And since this is not regular Photoshop, there's not as many choices here. But Camera Cal, I never do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the image. And there we are. I'm going to go to Expert, and I'm going to unlock that layer. And probably the first thing I want to do is I'm going to save the file, save as. Now there's some options here. A lot of people would, save in Photoshop, but I never do. I always go down to TIFF. Now TIFF saves the layers. It's also read by other programs, and so it's sort of more universal, and that would be the first thing I do. Now 4062, I already have a 4062 TIFF file there, so I'm going to change the name so I don't overwrite the one I already have. I'm just going to put a B there, so that creates a new file. Nothing more to do there. And I'm just going to take a quick look to see if I have any problems. I got a blue sky, and usually with blue sky you got defects that show up, and I'm going to go ahead and address those right off the bat. And before I could make any changes, I'd have to make sure it was unlocked. So that's unlocked. I'm going to go with a little band-aid thing. So I'm going to hold my space bar so I can pan over. I'm just looking for spots, maybe dust on the lens, or on any of the product. Now I do see a streak right there. So blue sky is usually pretty hard to fix. Hit my bracket key to make that a little bigger. Let's see what we got. Let's see if it does anything. Well, I'm not so sure I like that. So I'm going to go to clone. Make that a little smaller. I want to look at my tool options. I want like a fuzzy edge. I don't want a hard edge. I want the fuzzy edge right there. And so I'm just going to copy to the right. I hold the Alt button down. I'm going to select that. I'm just going to kind of work that, sort of fix that streak a little bit. It looks like it did okay. It might show up a little bit later, so we'll see. Get that out of the way, give myself a little more space to look at. Usually if you move it around, the spots will show up better. And okay, so I don't see anything. I think we're good. I'm going to go with that. And now at this point, I'm not going to do any cropping. I'm going to crop at the very end. Just going to go ahead and duplicate my layer. And generally, the first thing I do is go to multiply. And it's pretty dark, so I'll change the opacity. And what this does, it darkens up the darks, but it doesn't do too much to the light. Okay, and you can see the lighter color like the clouds there. As I move that slider, clouds kind of just staying the same where everything else gets darker. So that's what multiply does. It's going to use the layer underneath and multiply whatever's there, and then that's what you're going to see. And it works pretty good. If there's a secret weapon in landscape photo editing, this would probably qualify. So I'm going to go with that. And if I, click back and forth on the eyeball there, you can see what it does. So it looks good. I'm going to go ahead and merge visible. And I'm going to duplicate again. Now what I want to do is go into my Luminar. This is kind of like Lightroom. It's a pretty good program. And it's all set up to work inside of Elements here. So I'll just pause here. Okay, so now Luminar is open. And you've got a long list of editing sliders here. And I'm sure everybody could operate the sliders pretty easy. So no great mystery. But there are some that I use and some that I don't use. So I'm going to go down through those pretty quick. If I need to make a temperature change, just like in Raw Editor, you got the same kind of slider there. So I'm just going to leave it there for now. Exposure, lighten it up a little. I'm not going to use a smart contrast. I don't really like what this slider does, so I'm never doing anything with that. Highlights I'll turn down, shadows I turn up. Got some advanced settings, black and white. So maybe make the clouds a little whiter, but I think right now I'm not going to do anything with that. Blacks. Okay, so there we go. Enhance. AI, I generally don't do too much with this. I don't really like what it does when you get past the low numbers. So if I do anything, it's only going to be 2 or 3. Okay. Sky enhancer, nah, I'm not going to do anything with that. I never use it. Structure, this makes the edges stand out more. And so you got to be careful you don't get too carried away with that. You could overdo it pretty easy. So I might just, like I say, 2 or 3. That's about it for now. Color, here's where I work quite a bit. I generally don't use the vibrance and saturation because that does everything. Okay, but what I do want to do is go down to the individual colors and work with that. So, and mostly in luminance. Okay, I generally don't desaturate over. Sometimes if it's oversaturated, I might do it, in the negative numbers there. Mostly I'm working with the luminance slider. Okay, that'll bring out the red right there in the middle. So it's just a matter of personal preference. Orange, same thing. It might make things stand out a little bit more. Yellow. Yeah. Now green, generally I'll brighten the green up, but I also change the hue. Now a lot of my images, the grass and the trees are a little bit yellow looking. Here's some leaves on a cottonwood. Maybe just a little bit too yellow for this exposure. So if you change the hue, it'll make it look more green. Now that's overdoing it, too much green. But I'm going to go up to where it starts to look a little better to my eyes. That's 15. And I only do that with green. I don't generally change the hue on the other colors. Okay, so there's probably not that color bandwidth. So get to the blue here. That's definitely going to affect the sky. So if you want to darken the sky at this point, that's a slider to use. And same thing with purple. It's going to change the color of the sky. And I never change the saturation with those either. It looks best if you just leave the saturation alone. It just does weird things to the sky. And magenta, yeah, there's a little bit on the roof there, but I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, color. We're not going to do any black and white detail. We're not going to do any sharpening at all at this point. So we're just going to leave that. Denoise, same thing. We'll do that later on. Now the dehaze button I never use. Okay, it just seems to oversaturate, and so I'm going to use a multiply in Photoshop, and this is a similar, but it just doesn't do as good. And so golden hour, if you want to make it more sunset kind of color, you can do that. And here's another slider I never use. It just doesn't do me any good. And this would come at the very end. You got this is maybe more for animal photography or portrait or something, but for landscapes, if I use it, it would be very, very little, not much at all. So just leave that alone. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Elements. I'll pause it right there. Okay, we're back in Elements now. If I'll hit the eyeball here, you can see the difference. Now, let's say, I kind of like some parts of that, I kind of like some parts of the other, so I could blend those a little bit, maybe go halfway or something. Okay. Now, let's say that I wanted to make a layer that combines both of these. Okay. On my keyboard, I'm going to hold down the Shift, Control, Alternate, and hit the E. Now what that does, it takes these two layers, adds them together, and now you got this. Okay, so if I wanted to save these layers down here for later, and I could work with this one, shut those off. So now I have a layer I could work with. Duplicate that layer, and I could do just what I did before. I could do the multiply again. I can go back into Luminar there, do some more editing. And normally I do. I might do it a half a dozen times or more. So that would be my procedure. But what we're going to do here is we're going to separate the sky from the landscape. So I'm going to change the name. I'll put sky there. Okay. And put the landscape. Okay. And I want to create a mask layer. And find my little magic quick selection tool, and I want to select the sky. Oh, that was quick and easy. Now that makes the computer do the hard work of selecting the sky right along the top of the mountain. Now, I don't want to delete the sky, I want to delete the others. So I want to inverse the selection, and I'll hit the delete key, and we're done. I'll go ahead and deselect that, and the reason it's all blank is because my opacity is at 5%. So let's turn it up to 100. There's my sky. It's now separated from the landscape underneath. So now I could edit. Let's go back to normal with that. I could edit my landscape separately from the sky because I want to sharpen my landscape, but I don't want to sharpen the sky at all. So this is where I would go do my sharpening. Now I could do it adjust the sharpness. Okay. This is a quick, easy way of doing it here, but I feel this, adjust sharpness and elements is a little weak, so I would prefer to go back to Luminar here. Okay, now I've got the details. So I got some more options here, different size details. Let's zoom in on the mountain there, because that's what we need to sharpen up, is the mountain there. So we're just going to move the sliders until we get it to look good. That's probably good enough right there. So that's all I wanted to do is sharpen. Apply. Okay, so now we have separately sharpened up the mountain, but not the sky. See, this is what I don't like about sharpening the sky, is all that detail you don't want. You want your sky to be smooth. Okay. So if you want to see what the difference in the sharpened sky, let's put that at 100%. And that shows you the difference on the sharpening I did versus what I had before. Okay. So that kind of demonstrates how I approach, my first steps in editing landscape. So let me go back into Luminar here. And just to note, if you're going to go in to Luminar, you have to have your image highlighted and not the mask, because it won't open up in Luminar doing the mask. So make sure that's highlighted, and that should go. And we have a denoise here, and that's what I'm going to use on the sky. So I'm going to try to get rid of that grain in the sky just by using that slider. See how that kind of clears that out. Okay, that's pretty good right there. That's all I wanted to do there.